Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. Joe San Diego here, along with Kobe Lambert from the Podium Finish, just like old times. And of course, we encourage everyone be sure to subscribe to us right here on the Grid Network. Hit the bell icon, and now we have Super Chat available. So you want to show your appreciation for myself, Kobe, or anybody in the Grid Network team? Hit that Super Chat button. Visit gridranking.com. See our entire Grid Network team. Of course, you could do buy me a coffee as well to support your favorite on-air personality or member of the Grid Network team. And of course, a big thank you to our Patreon subscribers, Colin, the show, Mark, Robin, and David for investing in us each and every month. Once we hit $500 a month, we'll be at the track much more frequently. And Kobe, before we get into the news of all the racing, we do have, unfortunately, a horrible tragedy that occurred in Brazil that has shaken up the motorcycle community. This past weekend, Andres Vermicelli Cardoso was in the Moto 1000 race at Cascado, Brazil. And sadly, he was ran over by Rico Vermicelli de Rocha. This occurred during the first lap of the Moto 1000 race, a 38-lap race. After this accident occurred, the FIM protocols were enacted where the race was halted. And once it was aware of the severity of this incident, the race did not resume, and all the weekend activities were called off and canceled. Tragic reminder of the dangers of motorsports, and we're thinking of everyone in the motorcycle community, everyone in Brazil, and of course, the family and friends of both riders. Just a grim reminder of the dangers of motorsports. And Kobe, I know earlier this year we had, of course, Craig Breen, World Rally Championship, pass away in a testing accident. A lot of talk about safety, especially once we get to NASCAR later on. Formula One, if there was one thing, we saw Daniel Ricciardo is recovering. He had surgery. Hopefully he'll be back. And thankfully, considering the wet weather, the craziness of that race, it was a safe race, but just sometimes a little difficult to go talk about motorsports after such a horrible tragedy.
Yeah, yeah, Joe. It's really hard to come out here tonight. I've been thinking about this incident all day. One of the worst motorcycle wrecks I have ever seen in my life. And if you haven't seen it yet, I'm gonna advise you, viewer discretion advised if you decide to watch it. But I'd say don't watch it. It's truly horrific. And right now, all of my thoughts and prayers go out to these two riders, family and friends during this extremely difficult time. And moving on to our program tonight, we have Formula One, the Dutch Grand Prix. It was 5 pit stops later. Max Verstappen ended up winning his third Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort, 9th win in a row and 14 consecutive for Red Bull Racing, leaving only 4 drivers mathematically left in the championship hunt. Sergio Perez, Fernando Alonso, and Lewis Hamilton still have that mathematical chance at the championship, although they're highly unlikely to challenge Verstappen unless there's some epic late season collapse by Red Bull, which is super unlikely. Lewis Hamilton could be eliminated next race weekend if Max wins and Lewis scores no points. Joe, we know Lewis enters each season with the goal of the championship. How disappointing is this knowing that he'll have 9 more races with no shot at it or a car capable of competing for wins?
This has to be, I think, a tough weekend for Lewis Hamilton because they came out pretty strong when they looked at the qualifying practice. Looked like there was going to be good things, but then qualifying, it just went wrong. It just seemed like it was not working out for them. George Russell outqualified him. And then in the race, as chaotic as it was, I mean, Lewis Hamilton still was able to get a good enough finish, but it's just not good enough to do anything because Max Verstappen is just on that next level. So this was the point where now you're facing it. The championship is going to be really out of reach if Max Verstappen outscores you at Italy. During the Italian Grand Prix, we've seen how this race could be unpredictable. But once again, I just do not see the pace of that Mercedes being in contention with the Red Bulls. I mean, we were even seeing Alex Albon today, the pace of that Williams, bringing it to George Russell earlier in the day. This is just one of those deals where for Lewis Hamilton, you come in each season with the goal of the championship. That is the main goal. You're not going there racing for second or third. You want to go there in your best, even if you know Red Bull has the best car. This is just that point where now the reality is there. There is no going to be a drivers' championship, no eighth world drivers' championship. The constructors, that looks really out of reach for Mercedes right now. Best thing to do, start looking into 2024, whether that's put resources into that car for something better, or it's going to go out there and try to capitalize on mistakes by other. But really, I feel it's just race your own race, get out of the way. It is a disappointing weekend to know that this essentially was the end of any championship hope.
Yeah, for sure. And I think during this entire experience, this 2 years stretch for Lewis Hamilton, I think has been a really humbling time for him, because Lewis Hamilton, every level he's been at, every season of Formula One, he's pretty much had a car capable of winning, competing for the championship. But these last 2 years have been extremely difficult for him and Mercedes, because we're used to Mercedes building cars, that go toe to toe with Red Bull. But for the last 2 years, Mercedes has been completely out of it. It's not just hard for Lewis, it's hard for George Russell as well, although George was able to sneak a win last year in the Brazilian Grand Prix. But it's been really hard on the entire factory at Mercedes, because they know they're better than their current form. They have the resources, they have the people, they have the knowledge to be able to turn this team back into a championship contending organization. I was reading some comments from Lewis Hamilton over the weekend, and talking about his future at Mercedes, and he said that he's committed to waiting for Mercedes to deliver him to delivering a better car that's way more competitive. And so we'll definitely have to stay tuned for that to see if Lewis will wait to see how long Mercedes will give him a much better car. But for sure, definitely disappointing year in 2023. Best thing Mercedes can do is start putting all of their resources into 2024 so they can try to close the gap to Red Bull, which, have a car and a driver that's completely unstoppable at the moment. And Hamilton is 43 points behind second place in the standings to Perez. And honestly, it could have been bigger if Perez didn't receive a 5-second time penalty, but only 10 away from Fernando Alonso, who had a fast car all weekend. Does Perez need additional help to maintain second place? And can Red Bull wait until Verstappen clinches the driver championship?
Today, it looked like Perez had the opportunity to prove he could run up there, have a solid race. He made a great move at the end of the first lap to get the intermediate tires, had a huge lead. We knew Verstappen was going to get around him. He was just that good with the car. Then it looked like, okay, Perez maintained second place. But then it just seemed some of the little mistakes. Fernando Alonso got around. It just started to fall apart, and it just makes me think, especially now as Fernando Alonso is going to start slowly closing in on Perez, you got to wonder, what's Red Bull going to do? Are they just going to continue focusing on Max Verstappen and hoping Sergio Perez gets his act together? Or are they going to, at some point, we need to help Perez. We need to give him the better strategy. Overall, I feel that could be a little bit of a distraction. So I think Red Bull, they're not going to change anything right now at the moment, and they're going to hope that Perez delivers a better race at Italy next weekend, at Monza. Perez knows how to win. He can deliver good races. He needs to focus on delivering good races, because right now Red Bull, they want to wrap up this championship in the constructors and the drivers. If Perez could buy himself some time with some good, clean races, good results, I think he could hold on to second place. But the big thing is, don't expect Red Bull to divert resources and time to you until that championship's wrapped up, both the constructors and the drivers.
We're talking about Perez holding on to second place. I think for looking deep into the future, he'd like to hold on to his job first and foremost, because we know Red Bull, Dr. Helmut Mark, Christian Horner, they have extremely high expectations of their drivers, and Perez still is no closer to matching the performance of Max Verstappen. I know it was unfortunate what happened to Daniel Ricciardo this weekend with the broken wrist. Hope he gets well soon. Liam Lawson, the young Kiwi, making his F1 debut. That was really nice to see after all the hard work he's put on the road to F1 to reach this point in his career. So if Perez is unable to deliver, Red Bulls has a lot of options there. They could bring Daniel Ricciardo back to the team if Sergio Perez continues not to do what's expected of him. I find it highly unlikely they would put like a Liam Lawson in the Red Bull car, because he's still young and inexperienced. If he makes it to F1, probably be with an AlphaTauri or something like that. But yeah, Joe, I totally agree with you. I don't see Red Bull diverting resources to Perez to try to help his form improve. I think it really depends on how the cards fall in each race. If Perez is in a favorable position and Max is not, then Perez will get preferable treatment. But how often have we seen that this season? Not so often, because it's typically Max Verstappen at the front of the field, just running away from the rest of the competition. So I really think it is on a race-by-race, case-by-case basis here. And the change of weather conditions we saw today negatively impacted Perez, but it was even worse for Lando Norris and the McLaren team. Norris started second, stayed out too long, came back in the mid-pack, and he was never a contender. McLaren's race went up in smoke, and so did George Russell as the two made contact after the restart in the Williams. Alex Albon only changed tires once. He went to the mediums and looked to be in great shape until the heavy rain brought out the red flag. Were you surprised by some of the strategy calls we saw today, and was the performance by Albon and even Sargent earlier in the race weekend, was that an indication that Williams is a team on the rise?
Williams is definitely a team on the rise. That team, from essentially being seen as the last place team, they have some great strategy calls, not just this weekend, but other weekends. We've seen Alex Albon take advantage of mixed weather conditions with rain, dry patches, and just get into Q3, deliver great results. That is a team that I think is not only in the rise when it comes to the car development, but their strategy, because we all thought he was making a big mistake by just staying out there on those interns. Not the interns, the soft tires, not pitting for the intern tires like Perez, like Lando Norris, who went a lap later than everybody, not in contention. Somehow, Alex Albon went from 40 seconds behind the lead to essentially staying out. Here comes the dry weather, going onto the medium tires, and then collecting positions like he was just on fire. Unfortunately, the rain, once it came back heavier, that sort of neutralized it. But Williams, I got to say, their strategy department has been really top notch lately. When you look at the teams they're competing against, McLaren, I still can't believe that after what happened we saw in Russia a couple of years ago, where Lando Norris stayed out just a little too long to miss out on his first win, had they pit at the same time Max Verstappen went in, or especially Sergio Perez, totally different race. And just seeing McLaren's race afterwards went up in smoke, while Williams, unfortunately, we did see Logan Sargent crash out, but Alex Albon, he is bringing that team up. The confidence in that team is going up. And then for the strategy team out there to have this kind of race, I think this brings up their confidence, knowing that, hey, we're one of the best strategy teams out in F1, because look where we're doing, and we're definitely underfunded.
Yeah, and just the other day, I was just talking to a friend about Alex Albon and how he's basically reinvented himself as a driver. And time again, we've said these driver and team pairings just aren't a good fit. And I think Red Bull and Albon, they weren't a good match together. But I think Williams and Albon, now you're really cooking here. I really think if this driver and this team stay together, they can really go places in Formula One. Alex Albon is definitely, getting everything he possibly can out of this car. He's basically outperforming the car that he's in, getting it to good finishes, having some great runs, and all of that. I really think that that Albon and Williams, they're going to continue to make a lot of noise. They've made noise throughout the season so far. I know the finish doesn't necessarily reflect, of how well they've done at certain tracks and all of that, but I really think it's something we should really start paying attention to. And one of the biggest surprises of the day was Pierre Gasly getting a third place, first podium with Alpine. Both Alpine cars finished in the points, coming off a decent Belgian Grand Prix. Team is going through some major leadership changes within the organization, as we've talked about on Grid Tonight in recent weeks. They have a secure lock on sixth in the constructors ahead of Williams, but a ways to go if they want to catch McLaren. Should Alpine view today's third place finish as a win? And they are the only team besides Red Bull and Mercedes to have both drivers finish on the podium this year. That's an interesting little stat.
Very interesting little stat. The fact that you're only the third team to do this, because McLaren, they've come close, haven't had that happen. Carlos Sainz has not got a podium this year with the Ferrari. Very surprising that it is Alpine, especially we thought this team was going to start imploding after Spa Belgium, or during the Spa Belgium race, when it was announced all the leadership changes, the team principal's on his way out. But they did a solid performance in Belgium. Then today, Pierre Gasly, great effort. Esteban Ocon, I know he was really upset when the team put it on the full wets. Had we not had that red flag out, he probably would have been looking really good for potentially a higher up finish in the points rather than just 10th place. So overall, this team seems to be getting their act together, which is a big surprise. Does this have to feel like a win, getting in third place? I say yes, it does. Should they be at a point where they're going to be going for podiums each and every race weekend? I don't think they're at that point yet, but definitely try to aim for that goal of getting a podium because you can only go upwards from that. And especially when you have McLaren, their strategy doesn't seem to be that great. Ferrari, some of the mistakes that were costly, you could take advantage of it. You're going to get really solid performances and potentially a couple more podiums here and there before the season ends.
And on Grid tonight, we talked about Alpine's mindset heading into the summer break. They were entering the break, a ton of turmoil, lot of changes going on with the higher up in the executive department, and we wondered how they would exit the summer break. Would they come back as dysfunctional as they were before the break? Would they come back with their acts together on the new leadership? And it's safe to say, at the Dutch Grand Prix, we saw they have their acts together, and maybe all the changes they made were the right ones, because it really seems like there was a lot of toxic things happening at the top there. But I really believe today has to feel like a win for Alpine. Really great day for Pierre Gasly, showing the potential that car. Esteban Ocon getting in points as well has to feel really good for Alpine, because their good days have been few and far between. In 2023, a team we expected to do a lot better this year, and if they keep this up, keep improving each week, try to get the 2024 car be a step up from this year, we can start see Alpine closer to reaching some of those lofty expectations that have been set on this organization. Although I believe it's going to take a long time for them to get to the front of the grid, if that's what they really hope. It's not going to be in 100 races, but if they keep this up, keep improving, get the right people in the right places, sky's the limit for the Alpine team. And the next race is the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. On a big weekend of motorsports, MotoGP's in Barcelona for the Spanish Grand Prix. NASCAR's kicking off the Cup Series Playoffs at Darlington Raceway for the Cookout Southern 5 at the Lady in Black. And the NTT INDYCAR Series is at Portland National Raceway for the .com Grand Prix of Portland. And Grid Network will be there on site covering all of the action. Be sure to subscribe, hit that bell icon to make sure you don't miss any of our coverage next weekend at PIR.
Big weekend at PIR. Of course, that championship will be coming to an end, but one championship where the playoffs is just about to get started, the NASCAR Cup Series, and what a race at Daytona. The Coke Zero Sugar 400 saw 3 caution flags. A lot of people anticipated it was going to be a much more chaotic races with multiple cautions, multiple big wrecks, especially what we've seen in the last few years in this race, but only 3. And Chris Buescher, surprising everyone. If you're still surprised with him, there was a lot of folks that did pick him, including a couple for pick a winner. 3rd race win of 2023. So the first question for everyone out there in the channel, we would love to hear from you. Is Chris Buescher a legitimate championship contender? I'll tell you, yes, I believe he is. You look at the results of him lately, along with the 3 wins, another top 10, 4 top 10 finishes in the last 5 races. RFK Racing, that team has been coming together. A 1-2 finish, phenomenal effort. I know a lot of people did not see this at the Daytona 500 that the 2 of them will make the playoffs. How many people will even be daring to say Chris Buescher will have 3 wins? He has to be one of the favorites to advance, because it's just crazy to think when you look at the playoff standing right now, he is the 4th seed. We know he could win at Bristol. That's a track he won at last year when he was not in the playoffs. And I gotta say, for Darlington, he has to be one of the favorites. That track seems to favor Toyotas. Not so much of a great spot for Chevrolets. But for Chris Buescher, he seems like the kind of driver that could go out there, get a surprise win at Darlington. And then, of course, his teammate, Brad Keselowski, he has won at Darlington before. So a lot of great opportunities for that team. And then, of course, Bubba Wallace, great opportunity for him. First time he is in the NASCAR playoffs in his career. Bubba said this was one of the most stressful weeks leading up to the race, but he was really focused on what he could do at the track at Daytona, not worry about everything else. And of course, with Bubba in, that means Chase Elliott is out of the playoffs for the first time in 7 years. Half of Hendrick Motorsports not in the playoff, but Chase did get in the team owners playoff. So, very interesting scenario. We want to hear your thoughts in the chat room on Bubba and Chase performance on their respective playoffs because while Bubba Wallace is going to be in the driver's playoff, Chase Elliott is in the owner's playoff. We see one comment, a little bit of a mediocre face. I think that's in regards to what they thought of Chase Elliott not making it in the playoffs. We know a lot of people anticipate that was going to happen, but that was not the case. And I'll tell you this, Bubba Wallace, if he could get that win at Kansas, I think he has a great opportunity to advance forward into the playoffs. Chase Elliott, one of the big things with Chase Elliott, that team is just still not 100% at the pace it should be. At Daytona, they weren't really a factor when it came to leading the race until late in the race, thanks to pit strategy and that late restart. Overall, the way I see it, Chase Elliott, I see him comfortably getting to the second round. That second round, Talladega is his greatest opportunity to get into the third round. But if he does not get that win in Talladega, I think it could end in that second round unless that team steps it up. For Bubba Wallace, Kansas, that has to be circled on his calendar as the opportunity to move up. Even if he does not get a win in Kansas, I think that team could still advance high up into the playoffs, but he needs to step it up. You can't just point your way across the playoffs. We've seen time and time again, 1 point be the difference between advancing and not advancing. For Bubba Wallace, he needs to step it up or get that win in Kansas, which will be a big help because that second round is going to be very tough for all the drivers when it comes to the playoffs. Now, before we go into the next part, a quick comment in the chat room from Adam. Ryan Preece's accident at Daytona was the scariest I've seen in such a long time. So thankful he walked away. And I'm glad you bring up this point, Adam, because one of the things I bet you probably were thinking that crash, very similar to what we've seen in the past. Darrell Waltrip going barrel rolling at Daytona in the same event back when it was in the July 4th race. Rusty Wallace barrel rolling through the grass on the backstretch in the Daytona 500. That was essentially the second caution, of course, when we saw, third caution when we saw Ryan Preece going airborne. The big one occurred in the second caution where we saw 16 cars involved, and out of those, that only left 14 drivers in must-win situations in the race. Of course, that had to be a huge help for Bubba Wallace. But it all started when Ty Gibbs trying to go for the stage win. Christopher Bell pushed him a little too hard. The contact was made. And the big thing we saw, Ryan Blaney head on into the turn 4 wall. Very scary moment. Seeing that safer barrier, the way it flexed, my goodness, so grateful for that. And still, all the safety advancements, Ryan Blaney, he seemed a little bit out of it after that crash. Now, Ryan Preece, of course, as we mentioned, he went tumbling down the backstretch, especially once he hit the grass near the bus stop chicane seen during the 24-hour race. He climbed out of the car, but then he went to the infield medical care, did to Halifax Medical Hospital. He was released today, but still no firm details on what he was kept overnight for, just medical evaluations. The big thing when it came to this race, NASCAR, they said they're going to be taking the 41 and the 10 car to the NASCAR Research Development Center for evaluation. No word on the 12 car if that's going to be taken out to the R&D center. So this is another question for everyone in the chat room. How would you evaluate this race at Daytona, and what changes could we anticipate from NASCAR? I'll tell you this right now, NASCAR is not going to be an easy process for them because I'll tell you some of the goods from this race last night. First time in a long time, I felt there was an extra sense of excitement for this race at Daytona. I felt during the 4th of July weekend, we saw smaller crowds. The excitement level went a little bit lower. I felt that really picked up this year with the playoff, the regular season finale. I think is starting to come into its own. And we saw the biggest crowd at this race, for this race, since 2014. We know the crowd numbers were dwindling for this event. Seeing it go up, the stands look good and full, that's always a great sign. The race itself, leading up to the end of that second stage, it reminded me of the late 90s races at Daytona, especially when this race became a nighttime race in 1998. You saw 2 wide, occasionally 3 wide, and you didn't see a whole lot of crazy action until the big one occurred. This is where I feel NASCAR has to look at making some changes. We know we've done a lot of work to make this car safer. The questions about the safety of this car came into play, especially with Ryan Preece's crash, where we saw the window net looks to have gotten loose, and the safety hatch above him in the roof seemed to come open. I think NASCAR has to look not only at the car's performance, but reevaluate the track itself. Do we really need that last bit of grass before the bus stop chicane? Because in the replays, you'll see as the car was going over the small strip of grass, that's where it started getting air underneath. And as soon as it left for the paved area of the bus stop chicane, it started flying up in the air. And where the car landed on the grass is right above the driver's window. That appears to be where it just flung the car as that car dug into the grass. The window net came down, the safety hatch came open. We've seen vehicles, of course, tumble on the pavement. But if you have pavement there instead of grass, we may have seen a lot different accident, a lot less of those violent barrel rolls like we've seen in the past at this race. So that's one aspect to look at. The other thing, especially when it came to Ryan Blaney's crash, the safer barrier, the way the wall flex. And this is where it's going to get a little bit harder because at the end, when it comes to NASCAR making it safer for the cars, it's going to come down to a little bit of that aero package. If we have cars that are slower, they're less likely to get airborne. They're less likely to have such a hard hit with that outside wall. The big problem with that, though, of course, you're going to see situations where you're going to have that large pack much more condensed together because now nobody could get away from everybody. So overall, it's going to be really hard to see what happens in NASCAR's research and development of the race car. I think they're going to be looking at the racetrack. What can they do with that paved section as well? Now, one of the things, as I mentioned, Preece was released from the hospital this morning. We'll share any further updates on Wednesday's episode of Grid Tonight. And of course, one of the things we're going to be talking about next week at Darlington will be the playoff field. And one of the big questions we have to ask everyone, and we'll love to hear your comments in the chat room, is RFK the best Ford team right now in the Cup Series? I'll tell you what, surprisingly, I feel they are right now the best team. Penske, they seem to be hit or miss. Joey Logano, he got his win earlier. Blaney, he got in as well too in the playoffs. But look at them compared to Chris Buescher, who is fourth. And then Brad Keselowski, despite not having wins, he is up there, granted only 2 points above the cut line. He's been solid all season long. A second place finish has to feel really good. He's won at Darlington. That's a great opportunity for him to go out there, get another win, and secure himself into the second round. RFK could get both cars into that next round. Count them as potentially going into the top 8. Easily, I could see those 2 Fords advancing well into the playoffs. It is looking very much like those are the 2 Fords to beat because at the end, we're not seeing a whole lot from Penske right now. Front Row Motorsports, we know Michael McDowell, he got that win at Indianapolis. He's going to have to survive that first round, try to get to the round with the Roval. And even then, that does not guarantee you success, especially if you don't make it into that second round. So a lot on the table for the NASCAR Cup Series coming up with the playoffs. And of course, Southern 500 next Sunday. For the Southern 500, we'll be recapping that on Monday because with all the races going on late tonight on Labor Day weekend, we'll recap the Southern 500, Formula One, MotoGP, and of course the Portland Grand Prix on Monday on a special Grid Live wrap-up show. Kobe, I know we've been talking about the Grand Prix of Portland. One of the things that could be wrapped up, the championship. The battle continued to Portland, but here's the thing though. Alex Palou, he only has one driver that could essentially beat him for the championship, and that's Scott Dixon. The big moment, Josef Newgarden hit the wall exiting turn 2, essentially ending his race. He went to pit road, but he never came back out, finished 25th and is out of the championship hunt. Newgarden said he was going for it, but he was ahead of Alex Palou. He was ahead of Scott Dixon, even though Dixon had a better strategy. So Palou could not clinch it at that moment. Was Newgarden pushing too hard to get around the lap car of Devlin DeFrancesco?
That's what it seems like. Like Newgarden said, he went for it, and I guess he went for it. It looks like the car just washed up the track and ended up just smacking the wall there. It was unfortunate because we were all betting to see if Josef Newgarden could sweep all the oval races this year, but unfortunately came out 1-2 short. Newgarden was certainly one of the best cars this weekend, as he's been at all of the oval tracks in 2023. It was unfortunate to see this incident happen, eliminate himself from the championship. But like you said, Joe, at the time he was ahead of Palou, and Palou was in a position to clinch the championship. Maybe if he'd been a little bit more patient instead of trying to push as hard as he was trying to push, then maybe he'd have a mathematical chance. Just a couple of races to go at Portland and Laguna Seca, and now he's out of it. Yeah, but knowing Josef Newgarden, despite being eliminated from championship contention, he's going to try extremely hard these next two races to try to win at least one of the last two or win both races at the end of the 2023 season, because just because you're out of the championship doesn't mean he's going to be out of contention for winning these races.
And win these races, that's what Josef Newgarden is going to try to do, but it's not exactly going to be the easiest route. We know he has not yet won at either of those tracks, and the big thing, Scott McLaughlin, he is catching up on him. So he could definitely make it because, of course, he won at Portland last year. But the big thing, Scott Dixon, that's a driver that only is mathematically left in the championship hunt. He is still 74 points behind. So he needs to gain 25 points at least in Portland to keep it alive. But 54 points, that'll get you the most points. If you were to win the race, get the pole, lead the most laps, 54 points. But remember, last place rewards 5 points, so you're only really getting 49 points. You're trying to catch 25 points on Palou. You essentially need Alex Palou to have a disaster day in Portland. Kobe, when it comes to Portland, what kind of strategy do you anticipate between Alex Palou and Scott Dixon?
Speaking of disaster days at Portland, that's certainly possible with the Shelton chicane at the very start. We've seen multiple times since IndyCar's been racing here of contact and a whole bunch of chaos heading down into the first couple of sets of corners. So you very well could get Alex Palou's disaster day right then and there at the start of the race, because you never know what's going to happen. And talking about today's strategy, talk about Scott Dixon being so lucky with his own teammate, coincidentally, Takuma Sato, bringing out the caution that ended up helping Dixon, because he was at the right place at the right time, gained that track position over Newgarden, and after that, it was really hard for Josef Newgarden to do anything with it, because Scott Dixon had a fast car, just needed that track position, that clean air. His number 9 PNC Bank team executed perfectly and dominated this race and ended up in victory lane. In regards to the next two races, I think Chip Ganassi is going to be hands off. Like the best driver, best team ends up winning. We're not going to see them prioritizing Dixon or Palou. I think Chip is just going to sit back and let the two race it out. Palou is still the heavy favorite to win the championship, but after seeing what Scott Dixon has done these last two races in the Gallagher Grand Prix and today at Gateway, never count out Scott Dixon. I know in the earlier race in the summer, we're saying Palou is getting close to having one hand on the championship, that he's probably not going to lose this unless there's a catastrophic disaster. But it seems like Palou's hot streak has kind of fallen off lately, and he's just trying to hold on at this point. I know some people may say the contract distraction with McLaren planning to sue him for millions and millions of dollars, maybe factoring into his hot streak kind of falling off a little bit. Don't know if that's the case. But at the end of the day, Scott Dixon is the Iceman who does so many incredible things. And this may sound crazy, but I was on Palou wrapping it up earlier on a previous wrap-up episodes. But knowing how Scott Dixon races, I'm actually going to say don't count out Scott Dixon.
I wouldn't count out Scott Dixon. I feel Scott Dixon has to feel pretty confident because he's gotten a couple podiums at Portland. Very much likely to keep this going alive. The big thing, though, and this is where I'm thinking the strategy is going to be very interesting. What will Palou do? Because if Scott Dixon outqualifies Alex Palou, Alex Palou knows if he finished right behind Scott Dixon, he has the championship won. The big thing I feel, Scott Dixon, he's going to go out there, he's going to try to get the win, but he's going to at the same time be a little bit more on that careful side because he wants to stay ahead of Newgarden and everybody for second place. Alex Palou, if you're 1, 2, or even 3 positions behind Scott Dixon, you can still win this championship. I think he might take it a little bit more conservatively, but he's going to be following where Scott Dixon is. At any rate, though, I will say this. I do not think Alex Palou will do anything to risk going for a win or trying to make something out of nothing and crash out. I think Palou is going to be calm under the pressure. He's going to be cool as always, and he's going to go out there, get a good, solid result because he knows even if he, for some reason, does not wrap it up, which that would mean Dixon gain a lot of points, a significant amount of points. Laguna Seca is going to be very hard still to try to capture up from Scott Dixon. Dixon, 55th career win. One of the things, as Pat O'Ward, who finished second place, said, Scott Dixon doing Scott Dixon things. Only 3 cars on the lead lap. O'Ward and David Malukas. Right now, Pat O'Ward, he's only 11 points behind Josef Newgarden. So, Kobe, if O'Ward keeps going for wins, and even if he keeps coming up in second place, does Newgarden have to follow what O'Ward is doing on the track now for the next 2 races?
I can say with only 2 races to go in the year, the biggest surprise one of the biggest surprises of 2023 has to be that Pat O'Ward and Aaron McLaren have not won a race this year because after what we've seen from them, last year, we really thought Pat O'Ward could have taken a big step this year to be fighting to be winning more races and all of that, but we just haven't seen that this year. He's been close on multiple occasions, but just hasn't had that final edge to put him in position to get that win. With Portland Laguna Seca coming out, I know Pat was going to try to close out the year with the win. He certainly doesn't want to go winless this year. I've always wondered if the expansion to 3 full-time cars have had an effect on the Aaron McLaren program, taking away some resources from the other 2 cars that they were previously running full-time. And sometimes when you see an expansion, you see the team's performance fall a little bit. So maybe in 2024, they can start running at 2022 levels again and try to punch Pat or his other Aaron McLaren teammates in victory lane. So I think, like I was saying for Josef Newgarden, Pato certainly has to have the same strategy and mindset. Yeah, we're not competing for a championship, but we can still go out there and race for pride to try to get our team a race win. But I think O'Ward is probably going to be the one who's going to be the most motivated out of the 2.
Very motivated, and as you mentioned, surprising. He's winless this year, but he's this far up in the points. The consistency, very important. Of course, the next race, the BitNile.com Grand Prix of Portland. Alex Palou looking to wrap up the championship at Portland. Then you also have Newgarden versus Ward for 3rd in the championship. They could capitalize if Scott Dixon has a horrible race. And Scott McLaughlin looking to make 2 in a row at Portland. He is only 3 points behind Ward, so it's still anyone's game there. Kobe, this year's Portland Grand Prix, how's it shaping up to be? Because it seems like it's more than just Palou.
Yeah, it's shaping up to be an interesting race with multiple storylines to follow. And I'm assuming, like a few weeks ago, we were thinking, oh, the final races of the season, is basically just gonna be for nothing with Alex Palou locking up the championship a few races early. But no, with Scott Dixon's recent form, it really seems like that if something goes wrong with Palou, Scott Dixon can close the gap and at least have an outside chance of potentially winning the championship at Laguna Seca. If something goes wrong, Palou still has the advantage right now by a lot, but these things can change in a heartbeat. And Scott Dixon heading into Portland, he can certainly make this championship fight very, very, very interesting. You also mentioned Newgarden and O'Ward as well. We just finished talking about them. Scott McLaughlin ended up taking the pole today at Gateway, but unfortunately had to drop a handful of positions due to a grid penalty. And if it wasn't for that grid penalty, maybe we would have seen a much better race for Scott McLaughlin. And if he can go to Portland, get 2 in a row, certainly make up for the grid penalty that they had today. And also other things are going to be falling ahead into Portland is IndyCar silly season. We just talked about this week. Marcus Ericsson leaving Chip Ganassi Racing, going to Andretti Autosport. A lot of other things have been happening behind the scenes, and maybe we'll get some more IndyCar silly season news. I'm sure that's going to be the talk of the paddock when we get to PIR next weekend.
It's going to be very interesting from the first year we were out in Portland, where a lot of people were following the championship between Palou Award. Then last year, when it was pretty much willpower and firm control. This year, as you mentioned, there seems to be so many more storylines going on, plus silly season. And of course, we're going to be following all of that right here on the Grid Network. And of course, Kobe, the IMSA Michelin GT Challenge at Virginia International Raceway produced a battle at the front all day long between the pole winning number 14 Fasher Sullivan Lexus, the number 3 Corvette. We saw the race come down to the final pit stop, which ended up being the difference maker. The number 14 of Ben Barnicoat stalled in pit road. This allowed the number 3 of Jordan Taylor successfully ended up executing the undercut, giving him and co-driver Antonio Garcia the GTD Pro win at Virginia International Raceway. Fasher Sullivan was fast all weekend long. In practice, Jack Hawksworth started on the pole and lost the race by only 2 seconds. Kobe, how frustrating has this got to be for Fasher Sullivan to look strong all weekend long, but going home empty-handed without the trophy?
Like Chip Ganassi always says, close but no cigar. Vasser Sullivan, it was impressive watching the speed that they showed up with VIR, and it carried it all throughout the weekend. It seemed like they were going to dominate the entire weekend, until that final pit stop, which ended up, cost them. It was unfortunate Ben Barnicoat, the car stalled there. I'm sure the entire team wished they could have that moment back, but that's just how it goes in racing. You have to be nearly perfect in order to win these races. Today was number 3 Corvette, Jordan Taylor, Antonio Garcia, who were the perfect ones, and just one teeny tiny mistake ended up costing Vasser Sullivan that key track position. Corvette successfully executed the undercut there and ended up winning the race. If it hadn't been for that little stall there, we'd probably be talking about the number 14 Lexus dominating the entire weekend at VIR. After the speed they showed up with, it certainly has to be frustrating for the entire organization to look strong in practice and qualifying in the race just to end up going home without the trophy to show for it all. But still, all in all, good points day for the team, so they certainly have to smile about that.
Something to smile about, taking home those points. Overall, in GTD, the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW continued its dominance, winning its 5th race of the season in 9 races. Once again, Brian Sellers and Madison Snow execute to perfection everything as they continue to inch closer to a GTD title. The big thing, their closest championship rival entering Virginia International Raceway, the number 27, Harder Racing Aston Martin, Marco Sorensen and Roman DeAngelis had a bad day, finishing 12th in the class. Kobe, what does a 55.55 winning percentage say about Paul Miller Racing performance in GTD this year? Should they feel comfortable with 2 races to go?
Well, it's pretty funny. All I have to do is flip a coin whenever there's an IMSA race. But like, is Paul Miller Racing going to win today? Oh, yes. Or flip it again? No, because that's what it is. It's crazy. Just a flip of a coin. That's the chances Paul Miller Racing has a win in GT this year. And considering how competitive, sports car racing is across the board, a 55.55% winning percentage is extremely impressive. And to win 5 out of 9 races this year, like, wow, that just really speaks to their dominance. After 5 wins, going to Indianapolis, and they could get their 6, and if they win Indy, they could get their 7. So that would mean 7 out of 9 wins. Seven out of 11 wins this year potentially for that organization. And considering what we've seen from them this year, I wouldn't put that past them to up their winning percentage. They've been that good. That driver lineup so strong. Just everything is going well at Paul Miller Racing right now. Yeah, considering the field for Indy and especially Petit Le Mans, we're going to see a lot more cars, take away more points if you have something go wrong. They can't feel too comfortable, but based on what I've seen from them this year, I think they can just go to Indy, to Petit Le Mans, and just focus on points racing, getting a nice, good, consistent finish. As for their main rivals in the championship, the Harder Racing Aston Martin, Marcus Sorensen, Roman DeAngelis, you can't be finishing 12th, in situations like this when there's a team like this who's who basically shows up and executes almost every other race weekend. We haven't seen Paul Miller Racing have a great race weekend every single race this year. They've had a few disappointing ones, but 5 wins really speaks volumes.
Speaks big volume, 5 wins, that kind of winning percentage. And of course, IMSA, part of the Grid Endurance Performance Index, that'll be updated Wednesday on Grid Tonight. But we got to talk about the updated grid ranking.
Yeah, Max Verstappen continues to lead the grid ranking, is now in the 23-point range, the highest finishing score with Shane Van Gisbergen in 2022 with a 21.38. Today, Verstappen eliminated Formula E's Jake Dennis from overtaking him if Verstappen's score was to drop due to bad results. Josef Newgarden ended up falling out of the top 10 after today's disappointing finish at Gateway. And as we take a look at the top 10, Kali Rovanpera from World Rally Championship has moved back in. Joe, we've already talked about the busy race weekend we have coming up for Labor Day weekend. Got the Italian Grand Prix in Formula One, Spanish Grand Prix in MotoGP. Cookout Southern 500, one of NASCAR Crown Jewels Racing kicks off its 2023 Cup Series Playoffs. And then Portland hosting the Bitnow Grand Prix of Portland. Which race do you think is going to be the most unpredictable?
Honestly, I feel like this is setting up to be a very unpredictable weekend across the board. I mean, this Italian Grand Prix, Monza, some years it seems to be very straightforward. And then some years we just have a chaotic, crazy race where we've seen surprise winner like Pierre Gasly. We all anticipate Max Verstappen's going to go out there, win. Let's see what happens. It's just been such an unpredictable race the last few years. I wouldn't put 100% of my money on that. MotoGP, Pecco Bagnaia, I feel, is the person that's going to be the person to watch in this race. If he's off to a strong race weekend and just unbeatable, he's going to claim that. But if he's not, it's probably going to be a Ducati rider just the way it goes. So I think that might be one of the least predictable races. The Southern 500, the Cookout Southern 500. If Darlington earlier this year was an indication of how this race is going to go, and especially last year's playoff opening race at the Southern 500, this could be probably the most unpredictable race. Portland, we've seen where Alex Palou 2 years ago was caught up in that mess in the Shelton chicane, came back to get the win. Last year, Scott McLaughlin, he dominated this race. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens to essentially the racers at Portland. I think that could be one of the more unpredictable ones, but all of them going to be pretty hard to follow.
Yeah, the most predictable one right now might be the Italian Grand Prix. Max Verstappen, let's just put his name in for a Sharpie to win there. But like you were saying, Monza, it varies from year to year. Some years it's a simple, straightforward race like we're probably all expecting with another Verstappen Red Bull victory. And in other years, we see a very surprising performance, a surprise winner like a Daniel Ricciardo or a Pierre Gasly in those years. But if I had to pick one race, I think the Cookout Southern 500 is probably going to be the most unpredictable one. As we've seen with the parity in the playoffs, have so many different drivers from different teams in there this year. And looking at last year's Southern 500 winner and a Legacy Motor Club car, it was Eric Jones in that winner. Nobody expected that at all. And it just goes to speak to the unpredictability and the parity we've seen in NASCAR in the last year or so. So I think that will be my pick for the most unpredictable race. And looking at the rest of the grid ranking, I want to remind you all to be sure to follow on gridranking.com. Read all our race recaps, our articles on there. We'll have more of those coming this week and the weeks ahead as we get closer to the end of the motorsports season, and follow all of our grid network platforms across social media as well, plus the Grid EPI, which is updated every Wednesday on Grid Tonight.
Grid Tonight, a couple comments in the chat room from Bader talking about Lewis Hamilton. Never back down, never give up. Lewis Hamilton on top. Definitely going to be interesting to see what Lewis Hamilton can do for the rest of the season. As Kobe mentioned, we're going to be at Portland International Raceway for the Grand Prix of Portland. So we're going to have special videos coming up throughout the week right here on the Grid Network. Be sure to subscribe. Starting with, of course, we have Race 5s. We got YouTube Shorts, TikToks coming out, plus interviews with drivers, including earlier today we released an interview with Scott McLaughlin from Isha Azim and Jackson Lambros. And, of course, a busy weekend with Saturday's pre-race show, which will preview Formula One, MotoGP, and NASCAR. Then Sunday, the special Grid Live pre-race for the Grand Prix of Portland. noon Eastern. And then Monday, a busy Monday as we recap the entire race weekend since the Southern 500 is going to be going on quite late. Big race weekend, Kobe. Very exciting overall. And I think it's becoming Labor Day weekend seems to be becoming one of those race weekends along with Memorial Day that seems to stand out.
Yeah, for sure. Labor Day weekend has become one of the more busy weekends of the year for motorsports. We know Memorial Day is pretty busy with Monaco, Indy, and Charlotte, and sometimes we'll see another series race on that weekend as well. It's been a really busy summer, lots of racing on certain weekends, but it seems like once we reach Labor Day, that's when we start to get on the other side of the equation where we're not going to be as busy, not seeing as many races happening on so many different weekends. And after the long season we've already had so far, I'm sure many people are counting down the days, have their own countdown clock for the off season, which is still, a few months away. And with that said, it's time for our Grid One Shining Moment segment. Let us know in the chat room below what's one moment that stood out to you the most from this racing weekend. Joe, what was your Grid One Shining moment?
My one shining moment has to go to Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing. 2 years ago, when it was announced that Brad Keselowski was going to join the number 6, be a part owner, I'll be honest, I was skeptical. I was thinking, is this the right move? We saw Stewart Haas Racing make this leap. It worked out better. At the end, though, I was just very convinced that this was going to be a much harder challenge because Roush Fenway Racing was not where it used to be back when they were winning championships. Towards the end of last year, they were making progress. Of course, Chris Buescher gained that win at Bristol last year. Big step in the right direction. This year, this team has really stepped up. They have a lot to be proud of, I think, regardless of what happens at the playoffs. Yeah, if they don't make it out far enough in the playoffs, that's always a reason to be disappointed. But when you look back at this season, this was a breakout season. This was a season where I'm 99% sure nobody had the prediction that Chris Buescher would win 3 races before the playoffs. Phenomenal effort by this team, this organization. Roush Fenway Keselowski, my shining moment.
Yeah, it's certainly been a big surprise to see Chris Buescher in that number 17 team, peaking at the right time, right before the playoffs. I did not have them winning 3 wins in 5 races. Just such an incredible performance, and see the turnaround that Brad Keselowski has done with that team. Another second place finish to Buescher. I'm sure Brad is getting very hungry to get that long-awaited win in his own equipment. I'm sure he's going to be very emotional when that day comes, and based on performance of those RFK Ford Mustangs, I have a feeling that day is going to come soon before the end of the 2023 season. And for my Grid One Shining Moment, this may surprise a lot of people, but I'm gonna pick somebody from Formula 2. Got to give a big call to Clement Novalot for getting that feature race win at Zandvoort very earlier today. I believe it was on at 4 a.m. Eastern time. I was up watching that. It was quite the Formula 2 race. A lot of chaotic things happening, and especially major championship implications, which I'm sure will be covered tomorrow night on Grid Live Encore. But the reason why I'm giving my one shining moment to Clement Novalot is he entered today, as deep as we are in the Formula 2 season, with only 2 championship points, and then then the caution fall at the right time for him. He was able to execute perfectly, got that clean air, and he ended up winning. It's really crazy that someone this deep into the season only had 2 points this year, only scored 2 points, and then the only time he scored points this year was during a sprint race at Baku, and now he scored max points in the feature race. And for a driver, his second full season in FIA Formula 2, to not be finishing inside the points, to basically be running in the teams most of the time, and then to go out there, win this race, I find that very, very impressive. And plus, driving for a team like Trident, which you don't typically see running up front in these Formula 2 races. So Clement Novalot was a surprising winner, and this was actually his very first win in any type of motorsport competition since 2019. So it's been a long time coming for him. I just find it very impressive that someone who typically runs towards the back of the grid to come out here, dominate, and win a Formula 2 race. Just quite a run for Clement Novalot.
What a run. What a shining moment. Big thank you to everyone in the chat room. Hello for watching. And of course, if you're not watching us live, comment in the comment section. We'll answer or at least heart your response. happy to answer questions after the program goes off the air. And of course, a big thank you to our patrons, Scars Con Show, Mark, Robin, and David for keeping us on the air. They invest in the Grid Network each and every one. You want to buy Kobe or anybody from the Grid Network team a cup of coffee, you could do that through Buy Me a Coffee, link in the video description, or the Super Chat. And of course, if we're not live, there's a little thanks button. You could click on that on YouTube. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit the bell icon and subscribe. Don't miss any of our programs, including this week. Grid Encore tomorrow. Ben, Brandon, they'll be on the air recapping the Trucks Xfinity Series. Then we're going to have some videos of some driver interviews coming out Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday. Grid Tonight. Friday, an update from Portland International Raceway. Saturday, Grid Live pre-race. We're going to preview Formula One, MotoGP, and NASCAR. And then Sunday, noon Eastern, before the Grand Prix of Portland, we will have our special pre-race show for the BitNile.com Grand Prix of Portland. And then Monday, we'll recap everything on a special Grid Live wrap-up. Busy week ahead, but we do this for all of you that love motorsports. We love doing what we do here, reporting all the motorsports news and coverage for you. For Kobe Lambis from the Podium Finish, I'm Joe Sandiego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching right here on the Grid Network. Be sure to subscribe and follow us all week as we are going to be covering the BitNile.com Grand Prix of Portland right here on the Grid Network. Subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our coverage all week long. Plus, see some of our past videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interviewed people from the motorsports industry. Thank you for